Oh, I don't know where to begin, Chair.
You have 10 minutes.
I could do it about 10 hours. Mr. Culhane, I think you're having a volte-face moment, given what you've just withdrawn, and I find it absolutely incredible. I think your evidence here today, for me, is probably the most incredible evidence I've heard as a member of the PAC, and not in a good way. I've been chasing this issue a long time now in relation to the issues in relation to the Garda College. You can divide them into two different categories, Chair. We can divide them into the issues of process and why this issue wasn't dealt with for years, decades, and then into the actual financial transactions. There are so many issues in relation to process that we can't even get near the majority of the transactions because we've only a limited amount of time here. I think it's quite regrettable because he's otherwise engaged that Mr. Cyril Dunn isn't here today, because he's a key component in relation to this whole issue. And I would suggest, Chair, that when we do have Mr. Dunn come in here, that a number of these witnesses will need to be here as well in relation to the evidence we will hear. I find it, from what I'm hearing today, that, and based on the other meeting which I had to chair in the circumstances of the day, that there are a number of people here and at that previous meeting who are running for cover based on the evidence that we've been given. And there are a number of other people who are actually doing the state some service in relation to the evidence they're given. And that's without prejudice to where we'll find our findings, Chair. But that is my summation of the evidence that's been given here. To date. Yeah, of course, I said that myself. I'd like to ask each and every, and this is a yes and no answer. I'll leave you off with this, Mr. Howard, purely, and you're delighted with that one, but purely because you're not a member of management. And I'm not going to get into the intricacies of who you're referring to, but if I start with Mr. Nugent, and then Mr. Barrett, Mr. Kelly, Mr. Cahan, and Mr. Rowan, I want to ask each and every one of you, have you full confidence in every single member of the senior management team in An Garda Síochána?
Yes.
Yes. Mr. Barrett.
I have some reservations, Deputy.
So you don't have full confidence?
No, I'm very concerned by what I learned this morning. Truthfully, it's quite shocking to me, and you're probably asking me at a bad time. Okay,
but you don't have full confidence is what I'm taking from that. Mr. Kelly?
I would concur with Mr. Barrett.
You don't have full confidence either?
Well, there are some questions and some...
Mr. Culhane, do you have full confidence? And by the way, when I'm talking about senior management here, I'm including the commissioners at the senior level as well, and the commissioner. Mr. Culhane?
Yes.
Mr. Wan?
Yes, Deputy.
Okay. Mr. Kelly, your opening statement is the most explosive statement I've seen in the PAC. Can I ask you one direct question? Were there any efforts since the previous meeting on May the 4th, I think it was there any efforts to influence the content of your opening statement?
No.
Do you feel, given what you said here today, do you feel that your position in An Garda Síochána over a number of years has been undermined, and do you feel that you were misled?
I do.
Okay. We might get into the detail of that, but I want to ask Mr. Barrett a few questions. We heard the Commissioner here previously talk about the fact she did everything she could in her power in relation to ensuring that once these issues were brought to her attention on July the 27th, she set up a group, and the famous meeting where you said it was over 2 hours and she said it was 5 minutes. You still stand over the fact it was a 2-hour meeting, I presume?
Absolutely.
Right. The meeting that took place on July the 2nd, who attended?
Cyril Dunn, Anne-Marie McMahon, Chief Superintendent of College, Seamus Nolan, Superintendent of College, Michael Culhane and myself with with Cyril in the chair.
What was the purpose of the meeting?
This was the first meeting, essentially, of the steering group that was established to examine the issues that I had begun to explore in the second 2 weeks of June.
Okay, Chair, this is a critical moment in this committee's hearings. So the Commissioner told us that once hearing upon hearing of the issues in Templemore, she set up a committee and acted promptly. But are you saying to me, Mr. Barrett, that this committee that was set up, the first meeting of it actually wasn't after the 27th of July meeting, but it was already set up preceding on July 2nd and met for the first time on July 2nd?
That's correct, and it's at that meeting that I took the action to go and put together the report that was to go, and it's dealt with in my cover note to Cyril dated 6 July, and I'll just read this for clarity. I am pleased that this is the fourth paragraph. I am pleased that you intend to advise the Audit Committee / Chair and that you intend to include the Director of Finance, the Head of Legal Affairs, the Director of Training and the Steering Committee. For me, the devil is in the detail, and I recommend that we adopt a prudent and transparent approach to our work, and that you as Chair of the Steering Committee take all the necessary time to brief all key stakeholders whose support we will need to rely upon.
That's very clear. Mr. Culhane, have you any differing view to what Mr. Barrett said?
No.
Okay, that's very clear. Thank you for being prompt. Mr. Barrett and Chair, I think this is very important. What we have here is a situation where the Commissioner said she acted promptly on the 27th, after the 27th of July and being informed, and we have Mr. Barrett given different evidence saying that there was a July 2nd meeting, which was the steering group that was set up, not after the 27th, but on July the 2nd, that it first met. And we have Mr. Culhane who actually agrees with the statement of Mr. Barrett. So two members sitting across, the head of HR and people and the head of finance, are saying there was a steering group set up and met on July 2nd, and that steering group was the steering group to deal with the issues in Templemore College, in the Garda College in Templemore. Mr. Barrett, Mr. Culhane, is there anything inaccurate in what I just said there? I'll take that as a no.
Could I, just for assistance, I just want to confirm, Mr. Barrett met with me on the 30th of June, and on that date he informed me that he had informed the Chief Administrative Officer about the matters, the relevant matters, and that the Chief Administrative Officer had informed the Commissioner. So I'm just indicating what Mr. Barrett told me that on the 30th of June, and it's documented. Okay,
thanks. That's very helpful, Mr. Ruan. So effectively what you're saying here to me is, and we've now got to, through the evidence of the two witnesses, we've now got to the stage where there was a July 2nd meeting. The two witnesses who have, let's be honest about, given the evidence that's been given here previously, certainly have issues in relation to one another. But to be fair to the two witnesses, they are agreeing that there was a July 2nd meeting, which was a steering group set up to deal with the issues in Templemore. Yet, the Garda Commissioner said she acted promptly when she was told, and she set up the steering committee that met after July the 27th. So, Chair, for the record, there is a direct contradiction in evidence. We further have Mr. Ruan, and Mr. Ruan is telling us now that on the 30th of June he was informed by Mr. Barrett. You might repeat this?
Yeah, 30th of June I met with Mr. Barrett at 4:35 p.m. and he informed me that he had informed the Chief Administrative Officer and that the Chief Administrative Officer had informed the Commissioner.
So,
about the issues in Templemore?
Yes.
So effectively what you're saying is that Mr. Barrett...
Well, certainly about the issues that Mr. Barrett was raising.
Okay, so Mr. Barrett had told Mr. Cyril Dunn, I take it, who had told the Commissioner, and this is the 30th of June.
30th of June 2015, yes, Deputy.
At what time?
4:35 p.m.
That's very, very detailed. Mr. Barrett, can I ask you a question? Do you believe that the Commissioner of An Garda Síochána was aware of the issues in Templemore from July the 2nd or preceding that?
That's what Cyril Dunn told me, so I have no reason to disbelieve him.
So you believe that the Commissioner knew about the issues in Templemore?
I will say this, I don't know to what degree, But that's what I was advised, that she was aware.
Well, she gave evidence previously, as you were aware. You were sitting here saying that she was first told, obviously from the letter from Mr. Ruane, and then from the meeting, the disputed meeting on July 27th. Isn't that correct?
That's correct, and I think that matter can be clarified by Cyril Dunn in his direct evidence to you.
Absolutely, and I think that's why he's needed here with yourselves. So, for the record, Chair, we have a complete contradiction in evidence based on the May 4th meeting versus now. We have evidence being given that there was a July 2nd meeting where the steering group was set up. We also have a letter from July 30th saying that the Commissioner was informed. Now, obviously, we'll have to tease these things out, but that is a direct contradiction in evidence. Mr. Ruane has read out a letter based on the 30th of June. Now, if that doesn't raise serious concerns for each and every one of us, and indeed the Oireachtas, and I know we have a job to do, nothing else will. Mr. Ruane, I accept what you're saying in relation to privilege, and I know your role. I'm only going to ask you about facts and about your opinion rather than legal advice, okay?
There may be another issue I might be able to assist with. I can also confirm on the 6th of July 2015, Mr. Barrett informed me that he had attended a meeting in the Garda College on Thursday, the 2nd of July at 10:30 a.m.
In relation to?
He just confirmed. I met with Mr. Barrett on the 6th of July, and he confirmed that there had been a meeting in the college on the 2nd of July. It's just confirming the 2nd of July meeting.
Okay, so there's a confirmation, there's the 30th letter, and there's confirmation of the 2nd of July meeting. Thanks very much. In relation to when you became aware of these issues, after Mr. Barrett informed you, what did you feel you had to do? I remember, in fairness to Deputy McSharry, he did ask you, obviously the law is above any reporting structure.
Well, you have, there is certain documentation which is before the committee referencing the fact that I felt a Section 41 report was necessary. So insofar as there is documentation before the committee in terms of Section 41 obligations, I can certainly confirm that.
So, in other words, you felt obliged to inform the Commissioner, I'm not asking for your advice, but of her responsibilities, particularly under the Garda Síochána Act, I presume.
Yes, in fact, I know that there's a minute in the documentation that has been supplied, and it's a minute from the then Private Secretary to the Commissioner, which was sent back to the Deputy Commissioner on foot of my advices, and that refers to the advice with reference to a Section 41, so I can confirm that.
And you thought the issues were so serious, the issues were so worrying that you felt absolutely necessary to advise the Commissioner of her responsibilities under the Act, and that this was it was necessary that she act.
Well, if I can distinguish what advice I gave as opposed to what view I took.
Of course.
When Mr. Barrett approached me, certainly there was documentation. Mr. Barrett had a copy of the McGee report, and subsequent to that, certainly Mr. Barrett had informed me that internal audit had never carried out any process on foot of that. And there were a number of, I suppose, discussions where Mr. Barrett was confiding in me effectively to the extent of what he had discovered. So in terms of distinguishing what advice I gave as opposed to how I felt at the time, I certainly felt it was a significant and serious issue, if I can
thank you.
Put it.
Well, thank you for that, and I know you're trying to distinguish between obviously advice and what you felt. The Garda Síochána Act 2005, I'm just about to read it out. 41.1. The Garda Commissioner shall keep the Minister and Secretary General of the Department of Justice, Equality and Law Reform fully informed, and it lists off everything. Issues in relation to accountability, issues in relation to significant developments in relation to public confidence in the Gardaí, and actually 41.1d, any other matters in the Commissioner's opinion should be brought to the Minister's attention. It was under that section that you felt necessary, given your concerns and worries, to write to the Commissioner.
Yes, Deputy. Again, it is confirmed in a note in the documents, and I would add, I suppose I had been part of the process that was conducted by Mr. Justice Fennelly at the time, and I took what I could from that in terms of experience as to how both myself and the organisation might learn going forward from the examination that was conducted by Mr. Justice Fennelly. So.
Of course, I respect that. And of course, Fennelly happened in the middle of this process. Fennelly talks about the reporting of the interim report of Fennelly happened, and particularly he talked about the way in which evidence should be documented and the way in which evidence should be preserved.
Certainly, there's an examination of the context, a very helpful examination of Section 41.
And this was all live at the same time as. Just one last question to yourself before I move on. In relation to, it's distinct from your legal advice, did you feel that the issues here that were being revealed to you and being confided in you, as you stated by Mr. Barrett, were of such serious consequence to An Garda Síochána that if they weren't acted upon immediately, that they would be to the detriment of the Garda College and the force?
And again, Deputy, I'm going to distinguish from,
of course,
without referring to any advice I've given. You're asking me how I felt at the time. The answer is yes.
Okay, that's very clear. Thank you for that. Mr.
You get a second chance.
I'll go 3 or 4 times.
I apologise. I'm trying to be as helpful
I understand.
as I can.
No, I think you've been very helpful, Mr. Ryan. Just Mr. Barrett. Would you just very briefly, because I'm stuck for time, don't worry, I'll come back in with lots of other questions, but can you just talk us through your meeting with Mr. Dunn, I think it was September 2015?
Yeah. That's a significant time period from the 2nd of July to the period in September. By September, I had serious reservations as to whether or not a genuine progress was being made in relation to these matters, and I reflected on it in the context of the Fennelly report. And I would, if you have my documents before you, the section that deals with that particularly is headed up a critical inflection point, and it relates to, I suppose, that meeting in the college on the 27th, and then the scale of the issues arising, and ultimately I begin to deal with what Fennelly deals with by way of effective communication. So we've heard Mr. Howard a little earlier describe the meeting in relation to any other business and, in effect, the non-effective communication. I took some considerable time over writing this note because in the period that had elapsed from 2 July, when I originally prepared a report to go to Mr. Howard, through Mr. Dunn, and we're reaching now into the 3rd week of September, and I have concerns that the thing is not being treated in the multi-million off-balance sheet, as Michael Culhan described it, activity that is continuing. It is an active, ongoing enterprise within an organisation that I have line responsibility for. And so, in setting it out very clearly, I too go through the very specific issues that Fennelly raises in relation to what a Section 41 is intended to do, and how it is that this applies absolutely to the matters of gravity that I dealt with in my report of the 6th of July. And I was very deliberately putting it on the record.
Do you feel Mr. Dunn reacted?
Well, I think that question could be better put to Mr. Dunn.
Of course, but I want your opinion.
My opinion is we were at that point into a situation where the past history that I had become aware of was repeating itself. As in the 2008 report, nothing was done. It continued. I felt there was a danger, quite frankly, that my report of July 2015 was going to go the way of its predecessors.
Okay. Very quick question, rapid quick question for Mr. Howard, because I didn't want you to be left out. What date did you meet Mr. Barrett in relation to these issues?
I think it was the 2nd of June, the following year, 2016.
Yeah. Did you commit to meeting him and talking to him about these issues afterwards?
I probably did indicate to him that I intended to go back. And
why didn't you do that?
In the event, I should say, by the way, just so there's no misunderstanding, Mr. Barrett gave a very full, very comprehensive brief. I took it away, I reflected upon it. My normal part of contact is with Mr. Kelly as the head of internal audit. I was becoming aware, and I don't want to add fuel to this fire that there were differences of opinion and conflicts within the organisation. I was extremely mindful that my position was as the independent reviewer of Niall's work, and I was worried that I might create the mistaken impression that I was too close to management. And if I can put it this way, and I want to emphasise, there's no implied criticism of anyone in this, but everyone from this line down, except for Niall, is part of the domain that is audited.
Understood. So
And
that's why you didn't
that
come
was
back.
my only reason.
That's why you didn't come back to Mr. Barrett.
It is.
By committing to doing so.
Yes, and with hindsight, I probably should have explained that to him.
Okay, but that's very simple. Last question. So you met with him on that date.
Yes.
Remind us.
2nd of June.
Okay, 2nd of June 2016.
Yeah.
Did you subsequently meet with the Commissioner to discuss these issues?
Yes.
What date?
I believe it was the 16th of June.
Why?
Because I was so
And
concerned.
what happened at the meeting?
Okay. The meeting with the Commissioner, in brief terms, probably took the form of a lecture by me on the contents of the Blue Book, the Manual on Public Financial Procedures. I took the information I had got from Mr. Barrett and other information from Niall Kelly, and I put it through what I would call the Blue Book filter. And
how did she react?
Again,
I'm sorry, just explain the Blue Book to viewers who don't know what you're talking about.
well, for those who are not familiar with it, it's the Manual on Public Financial Procedures, which is published by the Minister for Finance previously and Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform, and it is basically the rules of the road as to how do you handle public money.
To answer my question, in relation to the Commissioner, how did she react to the whole discussion? Did you refer to Mr. Barrett's evidence, but what he had told you in the previous meeting, and what was the reaction of the Commissioner? And did you ask the Commissioner the following question? This is very important.
Okay.
So you found out about the issues in Templemore through Mr. Kelly, who informed you first,
yes,
and then subsequently you met with Mr. Barrett.
Yes.
Did you not challenge the Commissioner, who's the accounting officer? And remember, she's ultimately, the Commissioner is the accounting officer. Did you not challenge her as to why in the name of God you weren't told about these issues before? And did you not feel that you were being misled by not being told about these issues before? Did you or did you not make those points to the Commissioner? If you did not, how could a chairman of the Audit Committee of the Garda Síochána not make those points?
Okay. I am going to preface my reply by saying is everybody else seems at the time to have taken far better notes than I did. And I'm just being honest. But sorry, I'm not avoiding the question.
But as chair of the Audit Committee, you were actually legally committed to taking contemporaneous notes, to taking detailed notes.
Hang on. I don't want to give a mistaken impression here. When I spoke to the Commissioner, firstly, I presented the concerns. Yes, I did refer to, obviously, to Niall and to John Barrett. I did voice my reservations, not just at the delay in relation to this. I did discuss with her the manner in which this had been presented and my disappointment that it had passed. I did also express my serious concerns about the fact that it seemed to have been in the organisation since 2008 and nothing had been done about it. I emphasised to the Commissioner the absolute urgency of tackling it now, because the basic message that I wished to give to the Commissioner was that, and I believe, and you may question the Commissioner on that I brought with me and left some passages from the Public Financial Procedures about the responsibilities of the accounting officer.
Just to answer my last question, because the Chair is going to throw me off now. You weren't informed of these issues until Mr. Kelly, what date was it?
It was the end of May. End
of May, sorry,
yeah.
And then Mr. Barrett met you then subsequently.
Yes.
We sat here for the guts between most of us anyway, who were here the last time, and today, now for the guts of 10 hours. Gone through thousands of pages, I have anyway. We've seen multiple contradictions between the Garda management amongst themselves and with the Commissioner. We've seen evidence whereby two members of civilian senior management are saying they don't have confidence in their full confidence in their colleagues. We see issues across the board in relation to financial procedures, to the point where we don't even know if the Garda Síochána are tax compliant. So we're really, and for me this is, we're talking about the Garda College and Garda finances, but it's very symbolic across a whole range of issues in relation to the Gardaí at the moment. It's Gobu territory as far as I'm concerned. This is a crisis for our country. The evidence that's been given here today, to me, means we have a crisis in our country in relation to the Gardaí and in relation to the justice system. There's no way, given what evidence we've heard over 10 hours or so, that I, as a public representative, could have confidence in senior Garda management or in Gardaí and or how it is run in this country. Absolutely no way. Full stop. Impossible. I want to just restate some evidence from earlier, and then I'm going to do a quick fire round, and I'd appreciate if people could be quick, because otherwise I'll keep coming back in all night. Earlier on, Mr. Barrett, you gave evidence. I just want to repeat this for everyone, because I think it's critically important. We've got two issues going on here. We've got the process, which is the issue we're really dealing with all the time, and then we've got the issues in relation to the finances themselves. We're not even getting to the latter, because there's so many questions about process going back decades. But because of my concerns in relation to how Gardaí are running this state at the moment, I need to zone in on up-to-date process. So, Mr. Barrett, you said in your evidence that and I'm summing up, you can stop me if I'm wrong. You said in your evidence that the Commissioner came in here and sat there and said that the first she was made aware of this was on July the 27th, and that's been brought about. We heard that from the Commissioner. But that, and she acted promptly, is what the evidence that she gave as a witness, to be fair to her. But on July the 2nd, there already was a committee set up to deal with issues in Templemore, and that met. And it was on July the 2nd, and both yourself and Mr. Culhane were at it. And I asked you, Mr. Culhane, did you agree with what Mr. Barrett said? And you did. So we now have evidence, and this is very important, Chair. We now have evidence, which is a complete contradiction to our own current Garda Commissioner in this country, in relation to when these issues are being investigated. To be fair, she'll be in front of us in the coming weeks. She said the 27th of July, and she acted promptly. Two witnesses here have confirmed that the committee was already set up on July the 2nd. And obviously the committee met after that, and I'm going to ask questions on that. The second issue, which was in fairness raised by Mr. Ruan, is that he has notes as the legal representative that stated the following, that, or broadly I'm paraphrasing obviously, but that he was informed by Mr. Barrett that Mr. Cyril Dunn, the head of administration, had informed the Garda Commissioner about the issues in Templemore. Isn't that correct? And you said that you took a note of that I know, I'm sorry for asking a third time.
I have a handwritten note, and it's in a document contemporaneous July 2015.
And what time of the day was it again?
4:35 p.m.
On the 30th of June.
30th of June. Yeah.
So, for the Chair and for everybody watching, we now have a situation, and for everyone here, we have a situation where the evidence given by the Garda Commissioner, the 27th for saying that on the 27th of July she acted promptly when she first found out. We now know, and we know from two witnesses here who were at a meeting on July the 2nd, that this committee was already established.
If I could just add, there's a letter from me to Cyril Dunn on the 8th of July, and I'll just read the last sentence in paragraph 3. I'm very concerned about ensuring that all the relevant matters are made known to all the relevant parties as soon as possible. I've left the briefing of the Commissioner in your capable hands, and I was delighted that you briefed her in advance of our meeting of Thursday last.
So now we have also a letter on July the 8th, which restates more or less what was, broadly speaking, Mr. Ruan, what was stated on July the 2nd.
My first indication from Mr. Barrett that a working group was being proposed was on the 6th of July 2015.
Okay, so you have your note from the 30th of June. You have your note of the letter on or you have the letter from July the 6th, Is that right?
I just have a note.
Oh, note of the letter.
A conversation
and you
with
have
Mr. Barrett.
you have read out the letter.
I have a letter of July 8th.
Oh, sorry, July
confirms-
8th.
July 8th, received by the CAO's office on July 9th, which confirms the point that was made to me by Cyril that he was after.
So to sum up, we have a note about evidence that says that the Garda Commission was made aware of these issues on June 30th.
Well, that's Mr. Barrett had told me.
I know that, but it's your note.
That's my note.
Yeah, it's your note on June 30th. We have a letter or a note from yourself on July 6th.
July 6th, informing me that the then Chief Administrative Officer was proposing to set up a working group, and that Mr. Barrett had indicated to me that the Chief Administrative Officer had asked him to prepare a report in advance of the scheduled meeting of the Internal Audit Committee for the 15th of July.
we have the group that met on July 2nd, and the two witnesses have said that Mr. Culhane and Mr. Barrett have obviously were party to that. And we also now found out about the letter on July the 8th, which also has a reference to it. So here it's very clear there are definitive contradictions between the evidence given by the Garda Commissioner and the evidence being given here relating to three witnesses who hold the head of legal affairs, the head of finance and the head of HR. Now, can I, and that's very important, can I move on now to quick fire round, because I think that is critically important for everybody here to be made again aware.
Chair and Deputy Tenza, and who chaired that group, or who set up?
Oh, sorry. Yeah,
Just
sorry.
tell us-
just for a second,
Let Deputy Kelly.
who's the meeting that on July the 2nd? Who called that meeting or set it up?
I wasn't at that particular.
Oh, I know that. Sorry, Mr. Barrett. Cyril Dunn. So Cyril Dunn set up the group effectively.
And chaired the meeting.
And who chaired the meeting? He did. Okay, my quick fire round. In relation to the steering group, Mr. Rowan, did you take the minutes of the steering group meetings?
For the 6th of August and the 29th of September, yes, Deputy.
Okay. The meeting on the 6th of August, you obviously took detailed minutes of the meeting.
Yes, Deputy. And perhaps this is, I'm aware that two documents have been provided to you, minutes of the 6th of August and the 29th of September, but I was going to get to it earlier. Just, I have a file note in relation to the 6th of August, which is more detailed than the minutes you have. I had sent a draft of minutes to the then CEO, Mr. Dunn, and in terms of full disclosure for the committee here today, I did receive an email from Mr. Dunn then asking me to consider the draft that I had prepared as I'd gone into an inappropriate level of detail.
Okay.
I did redraft the note, but I did it on the basis that I would keep the earlier draft on my file, and it's available for the committee.
Okay, so let me get into this, because I think that the witness knows where I'm going in this, in the sense that you were taking minutes for the August 6th meeting. You sent a draft of them to the head of administration.
Yes, Deputy.
And the head of administration wrote back to you and said, change them.
I'll read out the, Ken, thank you for the attached before I review. I ought to share my initial reaction, which is that the draft goes to an inappropriate level of detail. And then I was referred to sample minutes that are on the DPER's website. Would you mind having a go at a draft in a similar style that could be reviewed? And I have to declare, I did look at the DPER's sample minutes, and I did amend the minutes, but I did indicate to Mr. Dunn at the next meeting that I would be keeping the earlier note on file as my own file note.
So this is incredible evidence.
Here, look, sorry to cut across topic. Can we have that, please? Can we have the file now?
I have copies here.
Okay, just give the witness
To get that circulated.
just give the witness a minute. I'll hold my time if that's all right.
My apologies. I had, upon reviewing my file on Friday, I had brought this to the attention of various people.
Pass it on. We'll get a copy.
Yeah, I have copies.
Okay. We'll just give the witness a chance if that's all right. He's just preparing stuff there.
Chair, we have a copy also. I haven't made copies of this. But
You might give it to the Secretariat, please. thank you. Thank you. I'm sorry for the delay in my time, but no, you're grand. You're fine. That's fine. So let's just sum up. We know now about June 30, July 2nd, July 6th, July 8 issues, and we also have a situation where you took a minute of the meeting. I think you did minutes on 2 meetings, and
yes,
the first meeting, August the 6th, and when you detailed, and I've never ever heard of a chief administration officer asking the head of illegal affairs that his minutes were too detailed. That's frankly incredible. But you were asked to change the minutes, but you held on to your notes in relation to it. Why do you think he asked you to change the minutes?
You're asking me my opinion, and my opinion was that there were maybe certain tensions at that first meeting, and maybe, you know, this was the first meeting where maybe those tensions, those issues that led to those tensions were being discussed. That's my own view.
So in other words, the cat was out of the bag.
Well, certainly interpersonal tensions were discussed there, and there were discussions about different views that persons had as to what should be done at that point in time. But I think, in fairness, I'm sure Mr. Dunn can.
Of course.
I don't want to speculate.
I know. In fairness.
That's my own.
But so you feel that there was tensions in the room. You document. I've never seen this, and I've never read it. So
yeah, again, my apologies.
No, it's fine. It's fine. Yeah. We'll get time to read it.
But you do have the actual.
What's the difference between the 2 notes? Between the minutes and this?
Yeah, there is more detail perhaps into certain issues that were controversial.
I'm going to be out of time in a few minutes. Just give me the précis. What do you think is the difference between the 2?
There were certain issues I alluded to earlier on about concerns that were expressed by Mr. Culhane about me getting external advice, and certainly Mr. Dunn had alluded to tensions that there had been between certain persons in relation to the approach that was being taken.
Who are those persons?
Certainly my view was that it was being alluded to Mr. Barrett and Mr. Culhane. That was my own view.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Howard, subsequent to meeting with Mr. Barrett, did you meet with Deputy Commissioner O'Coolan?
At some point, yes, and I'm just being totally honest with you now.
Because Mr. O'Coolan didn't have a great memory when he was here. He couldn't remember five-minute or 2-hour meeting. Yeah, so.
I have met with Deputy Commissioner O'Coolan. The next step, I'm pretty sure, was that I met the Commissioner.
Okay, so you met Mr. Barrett, then you met Mr. O'Coolan, then you
met... No, I think I met the Commissioner.
Commissioner, and then Deputy, Assistant Commissioner O'Coolan.
I don't want to accidentally mislead you on the basis of...
I know, I'll take your...
other things.
But anyway, you met Assistant Commissioner O'Coolan at some...
Oh yeah, I would have... I have a feeling that it was later.
Okay, fine. That's fine. But what did Assistant Commissioner O'Coolan say to you?
Well... I'm sorry, I'm just reflecting just for a moment.
I hope you can.
Can I just to assist Deputy Kelly? I mean, this is astonishing. You're coming in here today, Mr. Howard, to assist us on these matters. I find it very hard to believe.
But I'll come back again.
You'll have to hold it for some. But we're into 6-minute slots now because we're finishing with
Mr. Kelly, have you... no relation, lads. Geez, I've only 5.5 minutes now. Have you, during your auditing process in Templemore, and I appreciate it's an ongoing issue, so I'm not going to ask you to be specific as regards names or times or anything like that at the current thing, but in your overall thing, have you ever come across any checks being made out to senior Gardaí themselves?
Yes, I have.
Is that not absolutely bloody well incredible?
Well, there can be very innocent explanations for checks being made out to senior.
Is it just for a scale point of view? How many of you come?
No, well, like hang on a minute.
It's not mine.
there can be very legitimate reasons for cheques being made out to Gardaí for a recompense of expenses or whatever.
I understand that, but have you come across, how many cheques have you come across at that scale? Just approximately?
There could be hundreds of them, because in the normal course of events, people can expend items and they're properly vouched and they're properly.
Of course. But presumably you'll have to go through every single one of them stubs and correlate an expense and a vouch or to every single one of them.
Yes. Well, what we could do
sorry, that's somebody's phone. Please take it away, please.
It's not mine.
Go on.
The transcript won't be able to be completed.
That's the normal course of auditing. You may not look at every one of them, but you might.
You have to look at
but probably, I think what you're saying is senior Gardaí, that we want to make sure that there's no that everything is properly vouched. Absolutely. That's what you're saying. Yes, and that will be done. That is being done.
So we need to check out this just for factual basis. We need to check out. There are hundreds of cheques made out to senior Gardaí payable to the Gardaí themselves. Yeah. And we need to correlate whether they were expenses or not for every single one of them, or whether there were payments for other things. Yeah. Okay, that's going to be some piece of work.
We're not averse to hard work.
I appreciate that, but I mean, you're going to have to trace back years. Well, how far back is this going?
There are techniques to, as I say.
How far back is it going?
We are engaged in 2 audits at the moment, one of which is going back to 1998.
You don't have to correlate cheque stubs with expenses back guts of 20 years.
Well, we won't be able to do every single one. We will do it on a representative sample of payments.
And I don't want a date or time or name. What's the largest amount you've seen made out to a senior guard?
I can't.
Is it thousands?
There can be.
Is it
payments. There could be payments of thousands to
tens of thousands.
Yeah, like you could be going plane tickets or whatever to Australia or something, and they have bills of thousands.
Is there any? Because this, I'm sure you would, if you saw it, remember it. But is there any payment, any stub, that actually is in the tens of thousands?
In the tens of thousands, not that I can think of.
But there are some in thousands.
There would be some in thousands, yeah.
It's incredible stuff. Is there any evidence in all your period of auditing of payments for gifts for retiring senior guards?
I have documented it in my report, that there are payments.
Was this a consistent trend?
It seems to have been at a time in Templemore, yes, because I've documented quite a few of them in my report.
And approximately how many, and when was the latest?
In my report, I go through the laundry account and what was paid out of that, and I list a number of them. I think it's page 30 of my report, and where there's a number of gifts or payments at retirement.
What would these be, like paintings or vases or crystals?
That sort of thing, yes.
So for retiring commissioners or senior guards and stuff like that?
Yeah.
And was that appropriate?
I would not think so, no.
By hell, I wouldn't think so.
Yes, I wouldn't think so.
And obviously you're going to investigate that?
I'm investigating.
Okay.
I have some of that done, and I will, if more needs to be done, I'll do it.
Well, I wish you the best of luck in that.
Yeah, thank you.
I would ask you to ask for cooperation from all those who you need to get cooperation, and if you don't, you might notify us. Just a few quick fire.
Deputy, we're on our 6 minutes.
Will I get another chance?
Yeah, if everybody's 6 is, yeah.
Okay. Well, just last question. It's only a request for information. Mr. Nugent, could you provide us, going back to, we'll say, 20 years, where was the sports club set up?
1990.
Well, it doesn't matter. But can you provide us a list of directors of that since it's set up to the best of your capability?
To the best of my ability, I will, yes.
Up until now. And could you also, between now and we have to give you Chair, I'll take your guidance on this, we'll say a week. Could you also ask everybody who you, as the CEO, feel appropriate or necessary, who have obligations under SIPO? We met here on the 4th of May. Could you ask every single person and provide a list to this committee within whatever a week or 10 days, I'll be guided by the Chair, to state whether or not they have met their obligations under Standard and Public Office Act? We all operate under this. This is something that we read very carefully and go through intricately. I want to know that everybody who should have, at senior level in Gardaí, everyone who was a director of a company or was a director of a company when SIPO applied, I want to see a full report going back through all the years in relation to when SIPO applied to every officer at any time, and to know, even if they're retired, because it should be in the records, whether they met their obligations.
I think that's going to be challenging.
Okay.
As just in the context of what Mr. McCarthy said, that not making a return in the sense that there was nothing to declare in itself.
Okay, I'll tighten it for you. Will you ask all people who are appropriate, who are current serving Gardaí? That shouldn't be a problem.
All current
serving members of the Gardaí or any other appropriate people, have they done their SIPO returns since SIPO commenced and before the 4th of May this year?
That's still a big undertaking, Chair. I'm not trying to get it away.
But surely, sorry, no, but basically, send out an email.
No, I accept that. I will pursue it. I'm just saying there are.
Why is it a challenge?
There are 16,000 current people in the organisation.
No, it's only everybody over superintendent.
No, I accept that, but I'm just saying it's
send out an email to everyone over superintendent level and anyone who is a director of a company, and give them a chance a week or so to return and answer the question. And if they don't, you take it as default that they don't. But send that in the email.
So the company that might necessarily be superintendent, they still should make a return.
Absolutely. But that's my point. So I think you need to do a catch-all here and leave the responsibility, to be fair on you, leave the responsibility with them. All you have to do is collate the information. I would like, Chair, could we agree a date for that return?
We spoke about this to Mr. Culhan earlier as well. Your office sent out these emails. You know your mailing list of those who are required.
Well, sure, that's their own issue, to be fair.
Pardon?
I mean, it's really a matter for them.
As between Mr. Nugent and Mr. Culhan to work out this, you have the mailing list of those whom you know they're based on the grades who are required. Some of them might have to make a return if they have nothing to declare, but you should check with them all that they've confirmed their liability.
And my request is pre-May the 4th. And also, so to be reasonable, we say 2 weeks?
Well, certainly before the Commissioner is back, because we will want the Commissioner to give an assurance in this matter. So, in the interest of making sure the Commissioner doesn't come
we have here. To agree something, 2 weeks? Is that agreeable?
Well, at least 13th.
The request is for 2 weeks.
Before the Commissioner comes in the interest of the next meeting.
We will task this.
Do your best.
Okay. Before the end, I would just like to be clear about exactly what we're looking for.
What I'm asking you for is to ask amongst your organisation, amongst those who are Gardaí and senior civilian members of the organisation, to ask them, are they currently meeting their SIPO requirements, and have they historically met their SIPO requirements? And it's obviously for everyone over the grade of superintendent, and obviously anyone who is or has been a director of any company associated with the Gardaí.
Moving on. Next speaker is Bobby Elwood, briefly. 6 minutes only.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't think I'll take that in time. Chairman, just first of all, I'd like to...
minute or two left, and that's it.
Minute or two?
Well, we're all gone at 9 o'clock. No, we're gone at 9 o'clock. The committee decided we're out of here.
I know, but she was 10 to 9. You're all right. I say in jest, Mr. Nugent, as a TD elected for Tipperary and represented all, my role is to uphold the Constitution, legislate, and as part of the Public Accounts Committee, obviously, to investigate these matters. In relation to, I represent Templemore. I'm very proud of Templemore. It's a fantastic town. The Garda College is central to it, and I want to see it grow, and I believe there's necessary investment there in relation to where we need to go with the Gardaí, in relation to specialisation and a whole range of other things. But like during all of this, where there's huge public confidence, in the last few weeks, there's been changes in relation to the relationship with the people at Templemore, where they have no longer access to the swimming pool. They've been ladies' football team has been thrown off pitches, and a number of other issues. For God's sake, can you not? I know, in fairness to you, on the May the 4th, you said you needed to get the ducks lined up in a row as regards issues, right? And I agree with you on that, because they're probably ad hoc, right? But for God's sake, can you put in some interim procedures to allow the people of Templemore have access to facilities, particularly when the Gardaí aren't using it? Because that is the right thing to do. You know, the Garda College contributes hugely to the economy there. You know, but the people there embrace the Garda College, welcome it, work with it, and work with the people there, and do everything in that spirit. So could you please do that?
Deputy, I think yes is the answer to that. We will take that away. I think it's a really important matter. The college is central to the community of the area, and there are linkages that go both ways in that regard. And the sooner we can have the arrangements that provide the sorts of facilities that you talk about to the town of Templemore, the better for all concerned. As you said, I'm trying to put in place the right processes, that's all.
Okay.
But I hear what you're saying, and I will go away and we will come back to the next
The Minister or the Commissioner here the last day I asked the same question.
I know that.
And she gave a commitment that she was going to give the facilities back to the local people as soon as possible.
Okay, can we take from this, because I want to move on, and then I've just a couple of things, that I know you've got your ducks in a row and lined up and put everything in a proper process. That's fine. But that you'll try and work for an interim, because that could take a long time. Could you try and work an interim arrangement for the swimming pool, for the pitches? Obviously, the golf club is still active, so that's fine. But could you please work on those first couple and others that are there, and the gym and all of this?
If I can commit to revert at the next meeting, or indeed write to the committee to lay what's on.
If you come up with some interim measure while you're doing the bigger process, I'd appreciate that. A few just a very quick things, and then I'll just make a few statements to end. Department of Justice. I didn't have time to ask you questions today, Ms. Barry. Sorry about that. I find it incredible Department of Justice didn't know about these issues. I actually find it unbelievable, to be honest with you. So I'd like if you could go back and ask who approved the setting up of the Garda Club or the sports club. And the second issue is this, is I want any of the witnesses here. We were told here by the Garda Commissioner, we were told here by the Department of Justice that they first became aware of the issues in Templemore in October 2015. Does anyone here believe that, or have any evidence, sorry, not believe, evidence, that they were aware substantially of these issues preceding that?
Deputy, we provided to the committee a note from Commissioner Faulkner Murphy in the 8th of May 2008 in respect of the Garda College report financial regulation, which I'm taking it to be the report at the time, and included in that are handwritten notes from the Commissioner, where he had discussed. He discussed briefly with the Secretary General in relation to some of these matters. So that material.
I'm aware of that. I'm asking if there's any other evidence.
So that's the only evidence for the purpose.
Is anybody else any evidence? Okay. The department has no evidence.
Could I just mention it was September, in fact, is when we became.
Okay, sorry. I'm not going to argue the cost.
I know. I
know that. Just a few statements, and if anyone this is the easiest way of dealing with it. If you disagree, say so. It seems to me that the OPW didn't actually know what they owned in Templemore, in Clonmore actually, because the Garda College were renting it out. They didn't know they were not getting rent. I've asked PQs on this. This is incredible. They didn't know that they weren't getting rent on something that they owned, and the Garda College was renting it out and getting money. So I can't understand, Chairman, how in the whole budgeting process and the whole estimates process, somewhere down the line here, there wasn't a note to say, okay, we're deducting 38,000 or whatever the figure was because they're actually collecting the rent, and so there was some counterbalancing somewhere. So that to me is farcical. Mr. Culhane, I have to say that I found your evidence today frankly unbelievable. It was incredible. and not in a good way. And I don't like, it's not personal, it's your role. I think the idea, and I've read your letters, and to be fair, you have referred issues up. I accept that. I can see the emails, etc. I don't know what velocity you did it, but I can see the documentation. However, in your position, as far as I'm concerned, you needed to go further when action wasn't being taken, especially in 2008 and 2010, whether it's notifying this man here or his predecessors or going through internal audit. And the fact that that didn't happen, to me, after today, it raises very serious questions. And the last issue is also to yourself. We've heard here in relation to tax numbers, it's 4 of the tax numbers, we don't know if the lads will be able to make sure that they're meeting requirements and tax compliant. And we've heard so much evidence over the 12 or 13 hours. And you said that, in fairness, you had a reputation for getting things done and all of that. And there was a tax audit done, report done in 2010, isn't that correct?
Yes, that was on the Garda vote.
Yeah. How can you yourself, as the person there at the time, or, sorry, this is my last question, Mr. Culhane, Mr. Kelly, I'd say are the two most relevant people because you were there at that time. How can that audit of that vote be accurate given the information that is now being investigated by Mr. Kelly? How can we be sure that the revenue commissioners were paid the correct amount of monies given the volume of issues and the volume of stuff that's been investigated? Are you 100% certain that the report you did is accurate?
Deputy, I mean, the 2010 audit, or sorry, the revenue audit, and I think it's actually a stretch from 2010 into 2011, it was covering the payment of allowances without the deduction of tax.
It wasn't covering anything else?
No, it was exclusively dealing with the Garda vote. No, I know you're talking about the Garda College, but I mean, they were, and again, I'm sorry to repeat this, but they were outside the vote, and therefore they were not part of it.
So there was no linkages at all today?
Okay, we're going to conclude. We have to conclude.
Yeah.
I want to just, for the witnesses, Mr. Howard, if you want a minute, if there's some last point you want to make, Mr. Barrett or Mr. Kelly or Mr. Culhane or Mr. Rowan, if you don't need to, but if there's a point that you didn't get to make and got cut short, I just want you to put a last observation on the record before we close in the next 2 minutes. You're not obliged, but if there's something you need to say.
Thank you, Chair. Just at the suggestion of one of the deputies during the break, I just want to make it clear that if some of my answers seemed a little unprepared, I was only invited on Friday afternoon, and I was brought in yesterday to read the papers, and I want to express my appreciation to the staff who are here, but in normal times I would have had more time to prepare, more time to reflect, to check up on records, and I just wanted to put that on the record. Arising from that, I want to say that in the course of today, this evening's session, it has occurred to me, and I'm going to be suggesting to Mr. Nugent to look for a letter that I wrote at the end of October as Chair of the Audit Committee to the Commissioner in relation to the failure to brief and adequately inform the Audit Committee about these matters.
And did...
and it was the end of October of last year.
Around the time of the issuing of the draft report?
It would have been arising from the Audit Committee's consideration of the draft report.
Draft report, okay. And there's no need, but if anyone just wants to say something you missed, Mr. Barrett.
Ar céad is a cahirig befalman Crowbron Hortut August done boss the father. Chairman, I come before you knowing the democratic power of this institution you represent. The people of Ireland, you are the elected representatives, and I come here hoping to leave having answered your questions fully and thoroughly. I see this as a very significant matter for an organisation who must enjoy the trust of the people of Ireland, who must enjoy that trust because the powers that can be exercised, caution, arrest, detention, are of such constitutional significance that we need to have our House not just in order, but in absolute order. So I sit here with a sense of embarrassment that we haven't. but with no sense of personal regret that I raised this issue and that I continue to believe that I did the right thing in persisting. And there's credit due to people on my right and on my left for their assistance in this regard.